Now, as we do so many weeks here at the Daily Dose, we need to get over to our Daily Dose top 5. Hey, my Denver Broncos made a big trade this offseason. Desperately needing a franchise quarterback, the Denver Broncos sent quarterback Drew Lock, tight end Noah Fant, defensive lineman Shelby Harris, 2 first-round picks in 22 and 23, 2 second-round draft picks in 22 and 23, and a 2022 fifth-round pick to the Seattle Seahawks for quarterback Russell Wilson and a 2022 fourth-round pick. Of course, we now know Russell Wilson has been terrible in Denver. The Broncos have been terrible. And the Seahawks, while I'm not quite sure how much to believe in them, they're at least in the hunt for a playoff spot. Of course, in this era of hot takes and this era of a lack of sports history, we have many people asking today the question, is the Russell Wilson trade the worst trade in the history of the NFL? Well, today, our Daily Dose Top 5 is going to count down the top 5 worst trades, and you go ahead and you can be the judge yourself. We start off at number 5, and we go back to the year 1999. Imagine this for a second. Imagine that you had what you believed was an absolute sure thing of a draft pick. It might be a generational type of talent. How much would you be willing to trade for that pick? Well, back in 1999, New Orleans Saints head coach Mike Ditka felt that he had exactly that. So he traded all 6 of the Saints picks in the 99 draft, as well as the first and third pick in 2000 for the rights to draft Texas Longhorns running back Ricky Williams at the number 5 overall pick. I mean, it wasn't that Williams was bad in the Bayou. He was pretty good. It's just that he didn't produce the way that Ditka and the Saints were hoping. He was good, just never great, and he never took him anywhere. He eventually would be traded to the Miami Dolphins for 4 draft picks, including 2 first-rounders. The picks used to get Ricky mostly bounced around, but essentially the only pick worth noting was LeVar Arrington, the number 2 overall pick in 2000. None of the teams really made out that well in the Ricky Williams saga. Washington didn't. They got some picks, didn't do much with them. The Saints didn't. They got Ricky Williams, never did much with him. But for the Saints to put so much on the line just to get that one player and not have that player turn out the way they wanted, yeah, the Ricky Williams deal comes in today at number 5. We move on to number 4. And when you hear about the USFL making a comeback today, it all sounds kind of silly. But back in the 1980s, the USFL arrived on the scene and actually began getting big-name players to come play there. Think about this. Reggie White, Jim Kelly, Gary Zimmerman, Anthony Carter, they all went to the USFL because of that money those owners were paying their players. Well, a quarterback out of BYU decided to do that too. He spent some time with the LA Express before being picked by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the 1985 supplemental draft. But he wasn't very good in Tampa. He went just 3-16 as a starter. I mean, it wasn't really his fault. He didn't have an offensive line. He didn't have any running backs. He didn't have any wide receivers. He didn't have a defense. No help whatsoever. So Tampa Bay decided to ship the former BYU Cougar to the San Francisco 49ers in 1987 for a second and a fourth round pick. Go be a backup to Joe Montana. In return, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers drafted linebacker Winston Moss and wide receiver Bruce Hill. Meanwhile, the San Francisco 49ers got quarterback Steve Young. Now, Young had to wait his turn behind Montana, but then when he got his chance, 6 NFL passing titles, a Super Bowl Most Valuable Player award, and a Hall of Fame induction. Steve Young is one of the best quarterbacks to ever play the game. And the Buccaneers gave him away in a trade that comes in today at number 4. We arrive at number 3, and we go back to 1998, where the San Diego Chargers held the number 3 overall draft pick. The Indianapolis Colts had the number 1 pick. The Arizona Cardinals had the number 2 pick. But the Chargers were on the market for a quarterback. They were hoping they might find their franchise starter. Now, there were 2 prospects that year. that were widely considered to be the best of the bunch. The Chargers would have been happy with either one of them. But they were worried that Arizona would deal their second pick to another team and take that other quarterback. So the Chargers sent 2 first-round picks, a second-round pick, Eric Metcalf, and Patrick Sapp to the Cardinals to move up exactly 1 spot. And then, when the Colts took Tennessee quarterback Peyton Manning at number 1, the Chargers took Washington State quarterback Ryan Leaf at number 2. Manning, of course, turned out to be one of the greatest quarterbacks ever. Leaf turned out to be one of the biggest busts in NFL history. But as painful as it is to have that bust, it isn't nearly as painful as trading a bunch of capital for that bust. We all remember Ryan Leaf being a massive disappointment. But we sometimes forget that the Chargers had to give up a ton to even get that pick. The Chargers and Ryan Leaf come in today at number 3. We landed our number 2 worst trade in NFL history, and to quote Good Will Hunting, we just have to say, it's not your fault. Because this trade was completely forced on the Baltimore Colts. John Elway was the number 1 overall pick out of Stanford. But he didn't like the head coach and the ownership in Baltimore. And the bad news for Baltimore was, unlike a lot of guys, Elway had options. Elway threatened to pursue a career in baseball if they didn't trade the pick. And it wasn't just posturing, because Elway was selected by the New York Yankees in the second round of the 81 Major League Baseball draft. Side note, 6 spots ahead of future Hall of Famer Tony Gwynn. He actually got $150,000 for playing for the Yankees affiliate in the New York Penn League in the summer of '82. Many scouts saw Elway as a good baseball player, but he would probably be better in football. However, Yankee scout Gary Hughes believed that if Elway had concentrated on baseball, the sky would have been the limit. He would have been off the charts. Yankees owner George Steinbrenner aggressively tried to get Elway, and they say Steinbrenner planned to make him the Yankees' starting right fielder by '85, which Elway later described as a tremendous and exciting thought. He was like, hey, I could go play baseball. So the Colts drafted Elway anyway. But Elway refused to go to Baltimore even. About a week later, the Colts had little choice but to give up. So they traded Elway to Denver. And in return, the Broncos sent quarterback Mark Herman, the rights to offensive tackle Chris Hinton, a first-round pick in 1984, which would turn into offensive guard Ron Solt, to Baltimore in exchange for Elway. In Denver, Elway became a legend. He went to 5 Super Bowls. He won 2 of them. And he's one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game. Meanwhile, Herman was a journeyman quarterback. He only played 5 games for the Colts. Solt was mostly remembered for taking a ton of steroids. Hinton was actually a solid player. He went to the Pro Bowl 7 times, but still, he wasn't worthy of a Hall of Fame game-changing quarterback. The Colts just did not get what they deserved to get for a talent like John Elway. The trade was so lopsided, and that lands the Colts today at number 2. So we arrive at the number 1 most lopsided NFL trade of all time, and all the other trades mentioned on our list today were lopsided. But none of them came close to what happened on October 12th, 1989, the day that the Dallas Cowboys made a trade with the Minnesota Vikings for a price tag that has never been seen before or since. You have to think back of the culture of both of these teams at that time to really understand this one, because the Vikings were good, but the thinking was they were like a piece away from really being a dominant team, and they were thinking that piece was a really, really good running back. Well, the Dallas Cowboys had a running back by the name of Herschel Walker. He fit the bill. Now, ordinarily, most teams would never trade their star running back. That's all they had. Dallas didn't have much. But it was a really weird time in Dallas at that time. Jerry Jones had just bought the Cowboys. Jimmy Johnson was the head coach. The days of Tom Landry and all of that, those were over. That was long gone. Jones and Johnson actually kind of still liked each other still at this time. And they agreed they just needed a lot of players. And Walker was the only thing they really had. So they shopped him. And when the Vikings heard Walker was available, they came up with a deal that offered 3 draft picks and 5 players, with the possibility of some conditional draft picks tied to those players. Jones says when the Vikings sent the facts over to him, he ran over to accept the deal before they had a chance to withdraw the offer. With that package that they got for Herschel Walker, the Cowboys went on to make some exceptional moves. They turned the Herschel Walker trade into 18 players, including guys like Emmitt Smith, Russell Maryland, Kevin Smith, Clayton Holmes, and Darren Woodson. They built the foundation of a team that won 3 Super Bowls in the 90s. Jimmy Johnson later described the deal as the Great Train Robbery. I guess they probably should have called it the Great Trade Robbery. Now, you will notice my Denver Broncos making that trade for Russell Wilson didn't make their way onto our list today. It's not by accident. As much as we want to proclaim this the worst trade in the history of the NFL, there's one key difference between that trade and some of the ones on our list today. You have to actually get something of significance with those draft picks. In the last few seasons, we have seen the Seattle Seahawks squander a number of picks, picking up guys that wash out, never produce. If this trade is eventually going to be one of the worst ever, then 1, we really do need to see Russell Wilson kind of wash out here in Denver. I'd like to see him surrounded with a little more help before we declare that. And 2, we need to see Seattle actually get some value. Otherwise, we'll just say, well, the Seahawks got rid of a guy that was at the end of his career, but that kind of trade happens all the time. It doesn't make it one of the worst ever. Okay, YouTube, be sure you go over and check out the rest of the podcast, because this week on The Dose, we are taking a look at the college football and NFL seasons and discussing what they might look like if the season ended today. We even look a little at the NBA, and we look at some of the movement going on in college football right now. A number of coaches moving around. Plus, we even talk a little bit of World Cup. So be sure you go over and you listen to the full podcast. I will leave a link here in the comments on YouTube for you. Hope you all are doing well. I will see you all next Wednesday. Have a great week.